The following half-hour show is a paid political program and is not endorsed by this station, management, or staff.
The following program is sponsored by Excalibur Insurance Management Services.
First of all, I'd like to welcome everybody back to our 11th year of the Volpe Report. It's hard to believe it's been that long. It has been a labor of love. But we just said goodbye to our 10-year anniversary, which took place in early 2014. Our first show occurred in February on Super Bowl Sunday. And our first guest was our now county commissioner, Matt McGloin. Back then, he was still the starting quarterback for the Oakland Raiders of the NFL. And I was at that point the elected chairman of the Lackawanna County Government Commission to study the form of government, and was in the middle of conducting public hearings in 2014. So we've come a long way since then. But anyway, we're going to get the show started off the right way with a guest that's been on multiple times in the past, and that is Vince Galko, Senior Vice President of Mercury Public Affairs. Vince brings over 20 years of experience and is recognized as one of Pennsylvania's top Republican political strategists. Vince was the regional administrator of the United States Department of Education. He was the senior advisor, formerly, to United States Senator Pat Toomey, was the senior advisor to Congressman Pat Meehan, as well as Congressman Lou Barletta. He was the regional political director for former New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani's presidential campaign. And in that campaign, he was in charge of 14 states. He was the former campaign manager for United States Senator Rick Santorum. He was the former deputy director of President George W. Bush's re-election campaign in Pennsylvania in 2004. And he was also the former executive director of the Republican Party of Pennsylvania in 2005. Vince had received his degree from St. Joseph's University in International Relations and Economics. And on today's show, we will discuss the Iowa results with Vince and the path ahead for the three last standing Republican candidates for the presidency of the United States, as well as the additional challenges, since he's the prohibitive frontrunner, facing former President Trump that have nothing to do with polling results or delegate count.
This is the Volpe Report, a weekly news and political interview show examining the latest local, state, and national issues with Chuck Volpe. Insightful, informative, controversial, the area's premier political talk show, the Volpe Report.
Vince, welcome to the Volpe Report.
Great to be back.
Pleasure. You know, I know our audience knows that you and I are family related, first of all, and good friends. Political, we have the infection of spirit that politics is, right. Both of us. This is the show that I had planned all along because I knew this show. We've been off for a month. This is our first show, our 11 years now. This starts our 11th year. We said goodbye to our 10th year anniversary recently. And but I knew it would be the show that would be after what seems like an interminable length of debates and talk and conventional wisdom and political pundits theorizing and predictions. Eventually, you get some place where you count votes, and we have a result. I knew that Iowa would be in the books by then. I knew I would probably be a player, a participant in what happened for being for DeSantis up in Iowa. So I thought this would be a great show because now we have some dye in the water. It's been cast to a certain extent, and it's only one step, but it's a significant one. So I want to thank you for making time to talk about this, and I'll leave it to you to kind of start us along this path.
Sure. Well, I think I'm a Seinfeld fan, and there's probably some Seinfeld people listening and viewing today.
No question.
There's one episode where George Costanza decides he's going to do everything in his life. He's going to do just the opposite, and because everything he does in his life turns out bad. So he decided, whatever I think, I'm going to do just the opposite. And that's how I feel politics is nowadays. So whatever you think is going to happen, just the opposite is going to happen. That's how you should play it. So, you know, what a world we live in. I think going into the Iowa caucuses, I think everyone thought President Trump was the front runner, was going to win most likely. But I also think to myself, in 2016, if it was down to three candidates then, President Trump wouldn't have won. You know, he won a plurality. So here we are, so many years later, and it's down to 3 candidates, and he wins, but with the majority of the vote with 3 other people on the ballot. So it's a strange world. The other thing is that Iowa caucuses are really less about the outcome of the primary, more about judging the impact of your campaign. How organized are you? What is the momentum of your campaign? That's really what it's all about. Because if you look at history, in the last 24 years, there's been 5 Republican caucuses. There wasn't one in 2004. Only 2 times has that winner gone on to win the nomination. That was 2000, President George W. Bush.
Of course.
And then in 20, incumbent President Trump won the caucuses. Every other time you have, Ted Cruz winning, Rick Santorum winning, Mike Huckabee winning.
Going on.
So it's not a harbinger of the future, but it certainly is a test of your organization. It's a good springboard going into the the later primaries.
Yeah, this was my first venture in a presidential primary on the ground in the state in some official capacity, if you will. The last one, as I pointed out to you, I'm dating myself, was 44 years ago as University Democratic president, college Democratic president of the University of Scranton. I led a busload of students, politically like-minded, politically active, up to New Hampshire for the New Hampshire primary in the winter of 1980. And when we got there, I expected, we were there on behalf of President Jimmy Carter. This was, remember, I know I'm a Republican now, but for 45 years, my audience knows I was a Democrat. And we headed up to Nashua, New Hampshire on a Friday night, and after school, actually, after class, and we went right into a blizzard in Nashua, New Hampshire. At any rate, going on, and I'll remind people that there was a rare election that time, in a sense, because usually an incumbent president, which Carter was running for re-election in 1980, in their own party, gets a free pass, no challenger. That was an outlier and an anomaly because, in fact, there was a major challenge that year to an incumbent president, and that was United States Senator Ted Kennedy, right. The Kennedy family. And all of New England, including New Hampshire, was Kennedy country. So we kind of went up there, believe it or not, for the incumbent president being outnumbered, outgunned, and, not the sympathetic choice of a lot of voters. So that was my first experience. And then we go 44 years later. I've been laughing with some folks. We have some really cold temperatures here in northeastern Pennsylvania. It's 18, 20 degrees. Well, to me, it's a heat wave. On caucus night, I was out in minus 38 in Iowa. So take it from there.
Yeah, well, my experience was in 2008. I worked the Iowa caucuses for then America's mayor, Rudy Giuliani, right. Who was the most popular Republican in the country and one of the most popular politicians in the country. How times have changed in 16 years. But we knew that Mayor Giuliani was probably not going to win the Iowa caucus, but he wanted to have a good showing that he played better in the eastern states and needed to get him back to the east, and he would do better. He didn't have the great showing in Iowa, but I remember going out there. It wasn't quite that cold, thankfully. My thoughts on Iowa were, you go there thinking it's just going to be cornfields and small towns, and there's a number of that, just like Pennsylvania. Yeah. But I was really surprised. I spent some time in the Davenport area. Yep. You could easily think you're in mainline Philadelphia, being in Davenport. Right. It's a suburb of Chicago, basically. Right. It was really incredible to see the grassroots politics that takes place. If you want to see what politics is all about, that's what it's all about. It's retail. It's going out and convincing small groups, one by one, really fighting every inch, every voter to convince them to vote for you, which is why I think you've seen people like Mike Huckabee and Rick Santorum win the caucuses in the past when they were dramatically outspent, because in Iowa is one of those places where you can go and earn the vote inch by inch, voter by voter, and pull off an upset. But I'm more interested to hear more about your experience, what you thought.
Well, a little bit of background, I guess, is appropriate. I think it's kind of well known by now that I have been intrigued and then became a supporter of Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. To refresh the recollection of our viewers, you know this story, but I was invited to day one at the Four Seasons in Miami Beach when he announced. I was part of that day one group raising money. We broke a record that day, raised $8 million in 24 hours. The announcement didn't exactly go smoothly, you may remember, because he did it on Elon Musk's Twitter. Yeah. And now I think it's X. Mm. But and it crashed. And there were some other, I think, campaign missteps early on. I was, I guess, privileged to be invited as an inner circle kind of thing, a person, to Park City, Utah in July, when famously the campaign did a major reboot, reshuffle. And I was there, and we did a show that you co-hosted with me in September, talking about the major fundraiser in Pennsylvania that he had. I was an event sponsor, one of the major sponsors of that. I was with the governor all day. I had him in Harrisburg. I had him in Pittsburgh. So now you go through the debates in the fall, and you're gearing up for Utah. I found out, ironically, how these things work. I found out from the New York Times, one of their political reporters covering national events in the presidential primary is Nick Nahamas. And he called me. I was actually at a Christmas party in Pittsburgh, and he called me to inform me. Well, actually not inform me. The first call was to confirm that I was a member of DeSantis' National Finance Board, that I had been named to that. And ironically, when I saw the message, one, I was probably not in a condition to return the call because I was at a Christmas party. And two, I really didn't know that I had been named. So I actually got in touch with Nick the next day. We know each other. We have each other's cell number. And when I got a hold of him, I said, Nick, first of all, I wasn't in position to call you back last night. But I said, but honestly, this is news to me. I haven't been officially informed, so I can't comment on it or confirm it. He said, funny, he said back, no, I can confirm it. I have the list. It was given to me by the DeSantis team. I said, well, you send it up to me. So that's how I found out I was on the national finance team. But at any rate, I was asked then, along with key players, along with half of his Florida administration, to go to Iowa to help out. So that's how I got to Iowa in the first place.
Great. And what I enjoyed most about the Iowa caucuses was the individual caucuses and how, the candidate can't be everywhere, or the candidate's family can't be everywhere. So they rely on anybody, just their close allies like yourself, or they rely on the local fire chief who might be a friend of theirs or might support them to go out and just speak on their behalf. So, and I know you had some of those experiences. You share some of that? Or?
Yeah, well, thanks. Yeah, Vince. I actually can. I was honored to speak for Governor DeSantis because obviously the candidate can't be. There's 99 counties in Iowa, and there's multiple precincts in each county. So obviously they are looking for key speakers to go and represent the governor, speak in his behalf. And I was honored to do that at a place called Bondurant, which is about 35 or 40 miles east of Des Moines. We were stationed in Des Moines, the capital. And so, I had a driver, and, we were hoping we were going to get there. I was in a car that was freezing. The windows were minus 38 degrees with the wind chill. But we got there. It went well. And I will say this, and you have experience, so you know what I'm talking about. If you think of Norman Rockwell and the famous cartoons and drawings from the Saturday Evening Post, I remember seeing one about elections. He did one about elections. And I remember thinking, what a quaint, wonderful 50 years ago, 1950 circa throwback to what elections were. People like arguing across, and, they had buttons on for various candidates. That's what caucusing is in Iowa. I went into a high school gym, little under 100 people or so there, all sitting around like 10 at a table around these round tables. And some had DeSantis stickers, some had Trump stickers, some had Nikki Haley stickers. There were Vivek stickers on some of them. And they caucus literally, and they do the Pledge of Allegiance, and they have an agenda. They elect a precinct captain. He actually conducts the vote, but before the vote, they allow a representative, you got to have credentials to speak for the candidate. And I was so honored to speak, and I did speak for DeSantis. So having said that, it was a wonderful experience, and the vote totals, unfortunately, did not go Governor DeSantis' way. And this, I'm going to turn it back over to you, Vince, that, I had heard polls, we all had heard polls, that Trump had this hammerlock, effectively, on the Republican Party. And, predictions and polls are one thing, but getting 51%, I think he ended up in the vote, staggering, that he was that well ahead of everybody.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say that he doesn't have a mandate, certainly has a command of the primary electorate. And going forward, I don't see that changing at all. And we knew that, that was no surprise to anybody. I think Governor DeSantis showed his mettle coming in second. Some people thought he was fading, but he did not. He had a strong showing in second. On to New Hampshire now. And, for those of you who understand the primaries, the reason why New Hampshire and Iowa are always important is because Iowa really, to win there, you have to be a pretty strong Christian conservative, or at least have some credentials and some victories in that area. New Hampshire is more of a, think of a suburban, Northern Virginia, Philadelphia suburbs type of electorate. There's still conservatives there as well, but you have to be more of a moderate to carry New Hampshire. So that's why they're a good test early on in the process. So they don't give you a whole lot of delegates. It's not enough delegates, not even close to enough delegates to give you any kind of commanding lead going into the convention. But it's really more of a show to show that you can be diverse enough to win a conservative audience, at the same time being able to compete with a more moderate electorate in New Hampshire. Right. The real vote comes down to March 5th and Super Tuesday. That's really the whole show. Right. But up to this point, it's all, what kind of organization do you have? What kind of PR do you have? What kind of momentum can you bring into the next state? And that's why Iowa and New Hampshire are important. And then, of course, South Carolina is going to be very interesting, because you have the former governor of the state competing against Governor DeSantis, it looks like, who's doing well in that state. Yes. And President Trump, who will likely beat the former governor in her home state. So that's going to be an interesting battle in South Carolina as well. But I think New Hampshire is going to be telling. Haley, I think, is a good candidate. I think if she were the nomination, have an excellent chance of beating Biden, just as Governor DeSantis would. I think she's running a risk of being a little bit too moderate, a little bit too anti-Trump, right, which could certainly affect her in the future. I don't know what her future plans are. My sense is that she probably will run for U.S. Senate in South Carolina someday. Wow. Maybe that's why she's running this campaign now, is set herself up for a U.S. Senate run down the road. But I think you got to be careful when the old saying is, if you go after the king, you better kill him, right? Because otherwise, it could be a long, tough road for you. But I think I'm pleased as a Republican is that we haven't had much of a bench in recent years, where we seem to have a pretty strong bench right now, certainly with Governor DeSantis and Governor Haley leading the way, and a former incumbent president on top of the ticket. So it's good to see that we have an energetic, intelligent, strong list of candidates for our party.
Agreed. We're actually going to take a quick break now, but I do want to come back to this and break this down as we go kind of forward, and give you a little more insight into some of what was going on inside the DeSantis campaign. So we're going to do that when we come back after a short message. Again, I'm here with a top national Republican consultant, Vince Galko, and his credentials, and you've heard already in my open his extensive qualifications. He has organized and run in multiple states, including in Pennsylvania, run presidential campaigns for candidates, including successful ones like President Bush in 2004. That was W. Bush. And actually, some of my affiliations now with DeSantis and National People were achieved because of people Vince had hired 20 years ago. So you're dating yourself a little bit as well, Vince. But we'll be right back after these messages.
Now there's more places you can see the Volpe Report. Watch every Sunday morning at 10:30 a.m. on Fox 56. Listen on WILK Radio Sundays at 11:30 a.m. or watch on YouTube at The Volpe Report. More ways to watch. Still the same premier public affairs show dedicated to the topics that matter most to Pennsylvanians.
Welcome back. Again, we're here with top Republican national political consultant Vince Galko. And Vince, we took our break, and so I'll give you a little bit which we haven't talked about. You did a wonderful professional oversight of what happened and what's going forward. And I'll give you a little bit more of the inside ball stuff, because I was there. I was on the ground in Iowa. I had talked to, earlier in this show about how I went up as a young and idealistic young college student, president of the College Democrats, campaigning for an incumbent president. And without getting into all the gory details, when we got up there, it was in the middle of a blizzard. They were not ready for us at the Carter campaign headquarters. They didn't know how to utilize us because the campaign office had been closed for the blizzard. We spent the first night, our first night in Iowa, we were huddled in the basement of a church to avoid freezing to death. And I remember thinking, now it's funny how 44 years later, I didn't know what to expect when I got to Iowa. I was invited because I have a role in the campaign and all that, but I didn't know what to expect. And I kind of wondered, especially since I knew it was going to be record-breaking cold, if this was going to be somewhat of a repeat 44 years later. I thought, am I going to end my political career in the same way I started it? And nothing could have been further from the truth. The organization was amazing. I was driven out to kind of give a tour of their campaign headquarters. They had a separate area, a little outside Des Moines, which was their get out the vote effort. There were 60, 70 people, a beehive of activity. It was very impressive. But being the political realist that I am, and having run for governor of Pennsylvania and having had experience dealing with professionals like yourself, it's tough for me to see a road right now. Your take on everything I just said from a professional standpoint.
I think the good point you raised there was that we talked about early on in the program was that Iowa is different. It's, spending a ton of money on TV or a lot of mailings or other paid media doesn't have the effect in Iowa that it would in other states because it's all about the organization, which is why I think, Governor Haley got a lot of the limelight in the media, but it comes down to the organization. I always think about former Governor Howard Dean. Remember, Dean was going to steamroll Iowa. Yeah. He ended up losing, and then the famous Dean scream at the end of the. It was like it was just a given that Dean was going to roll from Iowa, roll into New Hampshire, and move on from there, and
it ended.
And ended quickly, Iowa for him. So I think organization, that's one of the states that really matters. Coming into New Hampshire, it's going to be different because I think that what people may not realize is that in New Hampshire, independents can vote for either Democrats or Republicans. In fact, I think when Romney won New Hampshire in 16, the majority of his votes were actually independents that had voted for him, not Republicans. Recently I checked that I think almost 4,000 Democrats have switched to independent to vote in this election, and only 400 Republicans. So Democrats are switching to vote in this primary in New Hampshire. I'm not sure for what, to pump up Trump, pump up Haley, cause chaos on the Republican side. But so it
appears to be Haley.
So I think if Haley has a victory or comes close in New Hampshire, it'll be due in large part to independents supporting her, but also in the fact that she's got the support of the more moderate base of the party. In politics, whether you're running for mayor or running for president, it's all about momentum. It's all about perception. Right now, it's going to be tough for any Republican to continue to battle forward when President Trump is winning by such large margins in these states.
We've never had in the history of our country a top presidential contender. In fact, former incumbent president, one term removed, be under 91 felony indictments as President Trump is in multiple states. There is a realistic possibility that he would be precluded from either conducting a fall campaign or actually serving as president if he's given a prison term. So I'd like to get your thoughts on possible scenarios, because while he appears to be steamrolling to a slam dunk on the nomination, meaning Trump, I've seen polls that suggest a pretty good chunk of his support, if he's convicted of felonies by a jury trial, a jury of his peers, that they would consider switching their vote because they would have concerns of whether or not he could serve as president. So that's a big question. And there's no historical precedent saying, oh, here's what I think will happen because it happened in 1876. It never happened. So.
Right. Yeah, we're in uncharted waters here. And I think that a couple things to unpack there. Number one, in 2016, President Trump proved that any news is good news. He dominated the news. Front page of every paper, the lead story of every newscast, lead front page of any internet broadcast. So that really helped him in that race against Hillary Clinton, is that he just dominated the news, good or bad. And I think he likes the fact that these trials are now filling that void for him. I think he's going out of his way to be disruptive in the courtroom. And so Democrats need to be careful they don't go too far, because they're actually playing into Trump's hands a little bit. As far as what happens if he is convicted, if he is facing some kind of penalty or jail time, it's going to be very interesting. And I think the role that Governor DeSantis, I think, played and was hoping to play was that, support most of the Trump, if not all the Trump policies that Americans like. Even Democrats and independents liked his policies. No one will argue about the national security of this country or the economy of this country pre-COVID. They liked his policy. It was just the rhetoric and the mannerisms that they couldn't stand.
Twitter,
and that was going to be Ron DeSantis. I'm Trump without the craziness. Yeah. So he could still fill that role. If Haley keeps it up and keeps going after President Trump, she's going to alienate a lot of those voters. Yeah. So going into the convention, if something does happen, and we have what's called a brokered convention or tumultuous convention, and if the delegates agree that President Trump can't serve or legally can't serve or just can't win because of the convictions, they'll have to choose another candidate. And I think the candidate who perhaps ends his campaign or suspends his campaign, he or she, gracefully and somewhat commending the former president, for his victories, will be in a better shape than someone who tries to fight to the bitter end.
Right. If there is significant issues relative, the delegates don't on the first ballot nominate Trump because he may be looking at convictions and potential jail time, they could throw the convention open. It could be brokered, and anybody's bet.
Yeah, the way it works, my understanding is that any primary or caucus prior to March 15th, the delegates are allotted by percentage of the vote in the state. Right. After any primary takes place after March 15th, they're not obligated that way. The state can take, and any state who had a primary before that could decide that it was just a winner-take-all situation. Right. And 9 times out of 10, in my recent memory, it's always been the case. You get to past that March 15th date, if you won the state, you get all the delegates. Right. Right. There's been, some holdouts from time to time at every convention. I worked 2 of the last 3, Tampa and Cleveland. I was on the whip team for both of those conventions, where you have some delegates who are just holding out for their person no matter what, and you have to kind of cajole them and talk to them to get on your candidate's side. So there really isn't a plan in place, I think, and I'm sure the folks at the RNC are game playing this out every day as what's going to happen. It'll be a very interesting summer for sure.
Yeah. Well, it helps Trump that I believe Ronna McDaniel, the national Republican chairwoman, wasn't she kind of a Trump pick? Didn't he?
She is. And the interesting thing about that is a little inside baseball is that there is a movement across this year. The national committee people, who are the folks that elect the national chairman, every state gets 2 national committee members to go represent them at the Republican National Committee. There is a very big movement by a lot of folks to get rid of anybody that's not 100% loyal to Trump out as a national committee person. Wow. to make sure there's no issues. So that's a whole other dynamic that's going to play out over the summer in states across the country.
That's kind of a whole nother show. Regrettably, Vince, we're out of time. I would like to point out that there's always personal moments in a campaign, which is great when you're at events. You get these personal moments. I told the audience earlier that we were in these private dinners for people that were on the national committee, as I was, and others, and key political people. The one night at this restaurant, we were in a back private party room, and I had the very distinct pleasure, as fate would have it, that she sat next to me at dinner, and that was Mrs. DeSantis. Great. And I have to say, what a wonderful woman. We had a great talk. We talked because she's the babysitter in chief for the governor and Casey's three small children. And she talked about very personally, and I was able, as a former candidate who had a young family and young children when I ran for governor, the impact on all the negative attack ads. Governor DeSantis got hit with about $40 million of negative attack ads. And she, spoke as a mother would about that, that's not really him, and how could they say so?
Right. Sure, only a mother could do it, right?
And I said to her, Mrs. DeSantis, I said, you know why your son and myself and other politicians thank their families in victory or defeat on election night? It's because of what you're talking about. It's because no one knows the impact, the stress on families when you see yourself on television getting destroyed and lies are or distortions are coming out of television, and it's hard on families. So people think it's just perfunctory. Oh, I want to thank my wife and children. No, it's much deeper than that. You're thanking them in a real way in a way you had it easier being out on the campaign trail than they do back at home hearing what's said about you. Right. So we had a great talk, and she is a wonderful person. But that having been said, I want to thank Vince for his time in studio, and again, his insights on a campaign that's way off the grid. What's up is down, and I don't think there's any there in this campaign. We're all learning it. History's breaking before our eyes, and where we end up after the conventions by the time we get to November. In fact, I'll say one final thing. I'm hearing from some of my Democratic friends, they're still maintaining that Biden isn't going to the wire, and he may not even be the nominee. All that, what a great time to have a political talk show every Sunday. And I'll be bringing you back, Vince. So thank you again for watching today's show. We'll be back next week with the president of the Pennsylvania Chamber of Commerce, Lou Bernstein. Thank you.